Good morning, everybody. We are here for a very eventful episode of Solidarity Live with my best friend, Linda, and we are going to be talking about so much. I don't even know where to get started. We had so much good news and so much bad news this week. We had Cori Bush camping outside the Capitol and successfully extending the eviction moratorium, and we had a very sad loss in Ohio with Nina Turner. And unfortunately, a lot of things that we are trying to get done before the August recess. Linda, how are you? Sorry, that was a very wordy introduction.
Now, hello, Jocelyn. Well, I'm doing really well right now because I'm just on here with the show with you, one of my favorite places to be. But apart from that, yeah, I'm just very busy, right? We're all very busy at Social Security Works. All of us in the organizing world are because there's just so much happening and so many opportunities right now.
Yeah, it definitely feels like information overwhelm right now because we are at a position we are trying to get so much done before the members go home. And as we discuss a lot on here, there is an actual window of efficacy. We have a president, we have the House, we have the Senate. So the question is, what are these people going to get done? Do you have
Yeah,
high hopes, Linda?
I do. I do. I have high hopes. I think you kind of need to be an optimist to do the kind of jobs that we do, Jocelyn. But I mean, I do. I think, right now, right, they're gonna probably pass this bipartisan infrastructure bill, which, that it's not a great bill. It's not in the end a terrible one, but they're gonna get it out of the way. And then Nancy Pelosi has says that she's gonna hang on to that bill and not pass it on its own. And so a big part of the job of progressives in the coming months are going to be to hold her to that. But then Congress is really going to be able to turn its attention back to this big reconciliation package, which, Bernie Sanders and others have said that this has the potential to be the most significant piece of progressive legislation since the New Deal. And I really am confident if progressives keep applying pressure that it can be. And there's so many long overdue policies that we really have to get into that bill. And what we're fighting for at Social Security Works includes expanding Medicare, lowering the eligibility age, adding dental, vision, and hearing coverage, um, putting down a big investment towards home and community-based services so that people can age in their homes, not in nursing homes, which we've really seen during the COVID pandemic that those are death traps and they're designed to generate profits for corporations, not to protect lives of residents and workers. So that's just really, really huge in this moment that we put a lot of money towards home and community-based services and create a new system of long-term care that's built around dignity, not profit.
Yeah, and it is terrifying and heartbreaking, as I know that we've discussed on this show before, that the COVID pandemic is what revealed that. But unfortunately, it's something that precedes the coronavirus by a lot. Elder abuse is an epidemic in these places, as is unsanitary conditions, as is healthcare negligence. And now inject a pandemic into that. And it's not really a secret that nursing homes became, I mean, what would you even call it? It's you don't want to say like the most horrific places for COVID, because COVID had a lot of horrific places, but people were dying and people were dying swiftly in horrible ways. Um, yeah, the right to age at home, it's important, especially now.
Yeah.
So I realize I asked about Capitol Hill and now I'm gonna like pivot totally. Let's start, come back, but let's start with the Nina Turner race. So she did not win. Were you surprised, disappointed? I mean, obviously disappointed, but were you surprised by how things went?
Yeah, so very much disappointed. I would say, not terribly surprised, just because I was paying attention to like the coverage and what was happening there in the last couple of weeks, and you could see that shift in momentum, unfortunately, happening down there. And there were a few reasons for it, but I would say just largely the infusion of big money that happened there on behalf of her opponent. And as an American Jew in particular, like it is just very infuriating to me because there were a few organizations that put money in towards her opponent, but one of the biggest ones was a group called Democratic Majority for Israel. And what they basically believe is that every U.S. lawmaker should just do whatever the current Israeli government wants, which, I don't, and most American Jews, don't agree with. Many people would say, that's not even pro-Israel, and that's not really a standard that we have for other countries in the world, that, America's job should just be to support their government and whatever it wants to do in an illegal occupation, as opposed to look at it from the point of view of America. And then what makes it even worse is that the ads that this group put out didn't even focus on Israel at all. They were just attacking Nina Turner with anything that they could throw on her. They used their initials, DMFI, so people don't know that it's about Israel. And I think, if they wanted to have an honest debate over Israeli-Palestinian policy in that race, all right, at least that's something that one could make a case for. But the fact that this group is going to pour all this money in and not even be honest about what their issue really is with Nina Turner, that's pretty despicable.
Well, sure. And I think that, not to get us too off topic, but it's a conversation that I think is very important. It's become so polarized. And as this has been in the news cycle for, I guess, since the Biden came to office, it's getting I don't think people are really aware anymore of the fact that the Israeli government has gone so far to the right that even if you are somebody who supports us supporting Israel, supports, obviously they're allowed to exist as a country, right? Even if you are very pro-Israel, the current government and what is happening is not normal. This is something that has gone far off the rails, and the squad and Nina Turner and everybody else who is critical of that's not a terribly radical position. I mean, would you say it is? I am not Jewish, so I am not trying to tread into uncomfortable territory.
Yeah, I certainly think it shouldn't be a radical position, and it's not among the general American public. It's not among American Jews, but groups like DMFI, they really want it to remain a radical position in Congress. And so they think that, if the number of members of Congress who are willing to be critical of the Israeli government increases from 4 to 5, right? That's somehow just a huge problem for them. And so they really just decided that they were going to throw everything that they could at Nina Turner.
Yeah, it's very disappointing. And one thing I do want to keep in mind, this is not my idea. I read an Atlantic article that gave me a lot of thoughts about this. They were like, we were putting all this pressure on this special election in Ohio because it is a special election. I really wanted her to win. But anyone who's going to say from this that, progressive candidates can't win, it's just goofy because of what you're saying, because of the big money influx, because of the high powered, I don't want to say interventions, because look, people did vote, whatever. But it's August. This is not a very heavy turnout election by any stretch of the imagination. And it's kind of funny to me, the cynicism that'll pop up from moments like these. Obviously, we're not going to win everything, right? And also, the times we lose, as much as we should be reflective and look at why we lost and look at what we could do differently, it's not necessarily always indicative of, there's this groundswell shift away from progressive candidates. It's just weird. I mean, do you see that too? I feel like every time we lose, there's some big, this is a referendum on the far left.
Right. Yeah, I very much agree. You really can't extrapolate that much from this one race. And there were some unique circumstances. I mean, like you, I very much wanted Nina Turner to win. I admire a lot of the work that she's done, but she did also have some unique stuff in terms of, as you said, this was a very low turnout primary in August, and she had a history of saying some very critical things about the Democratic Party, which, a lot of us, right, as progressives, we do want to hold Democrats accountable. But that can be a little bit tough in terms of yes, most really high propensity Democratic primary voters do tend to like the Democratic Party, like Joe Biden. And so I think that that was difficult. And I mean, just the fact that she has like a history of being very combative on social media, like it's funny. I think in some ways, you can compare it to another woman with the same initials, Neera Tanden. Now, like, I'm not trying to compare them on a policy level at all. Like, Nina Turner, she's a fighter for Medicare for all, a Green New Deal, and all these changes that we need. And Neera Tanden, who was the head of the Center for American Progress, was really much more from the establishment, moderate wing of the Democratic Party. And it's not a perfect comparison because she didn't run for office, but she was nominated for the office of Management and Budget Director in the Biden administration. And ultimately, that didn't work out for her because it was a Senate confirmed position. And she had done a lot of very combative tweets against both progressives and also against Republicans. But like when her nomination didn't go through, I don't think there were a lot of people saying, this means that moderate establishment Democrats shouldn't be nominated to any more positions ever because Neera Tanden's nomination didn't go through. They said, like, this person just had some unique vulnerabilities, like, related to the way that she used social media. And so I don't think that you can extrapolate any more from this one primary than you could from that one nomination not going through.
I love that you I love that you say that. I would have never put it that way, but that is exactly it. It is a way better point because it's true. When moderate candidates lose, the answer is okay, that candidate lost. When progressives lose, it's like this whole existential thing. And I resent that a little bit because again, Nina Turner is she is a very dynamic person in wonderful ways and ways which create drawbacks. And again, this was not a normal race. This is a race that was happening because it was a congressional race where, you know, the last congresswoman was nominated to the White House. And so it's like this special election in the middle of summer, in the middle of a pandemic. And it's just like, you know, even if she were a perfect candidate, it's just weird. This desire to make the case that progressives can't win when we know they can, and they do, and we don't win all the time, and no candidate or no ideology wins all the time. But yeah, exactly. I don't think anybody has ever seen a moderate candidate lose, and then the mainstream narrative becomes, are moderate Democrats dead? Is the Democratic Party dead? Like, I wish. That would be cool. And I mean, when they do, it's more like socialist Bernie Sanders is taking over.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more focus on like the unique circumstances of the race when it's a moderate who loses.
Right.
When AOC beat Joe Crowley, right, it wasn't necessarily, oh, this is a problem for the moderate wing of the Democratic Party. It was, oh, Joe Crowley lost touch with his district. And we've seen this a lot with the other primaries that progressives and Justice Democrats have won. And I mean, I would say, like, one lesson I think for the left maybe to take from this race is just how well that fresh faces often, like really people who are charismatic, who are new on the scene, can do in primaries. Like AOC would be a great example of that. Cori Bush as well. I mean, she was a Black Lives Matter activist, and she ran for office twice before winning again, which is another thing to consider. Like, it's entirely possible that we haven't heard the last of Nina Turner or another progressive in this district. Like, when there is not a low turnout primary in the middle of August, I think that the situation in that district could be quite different. And that's especially if the newly elected congresswoman decides to deviate from the party to vote with the right and not with progressives. So I think that there's still a chance. But I would say that people often like fresh faces and primaries and just, yeah, somebody new to get excited about.
Well, that is very true. I think a lot of one of the parts of coverage of this that was semi accurate is it did feel like a rehash of 2016. It's like, Bernie candidate versus Clinton candidate. And I don't know, do you get frustrated with that too? I'm over it. I mean, the progressive movement, as much as I love Bernie, is so much more than Bernie Sanders. And there was something about the way that was framed that I couldn't really put my finger on until this week. And it's like, listen, Bernie's literal campaign slogan was not me, us, right? This is not a man that wants to be the hagiographic figurehead forever, right? So Nina being framed as this like Bernie candidate versus a Clinton endorsed candidate, I'm over it. I'm over all of it. I say we cancel it. Bernie is a wonderful man and a wonderful senator, and he had 2 very inspiring presidential runs. And I think, the reality is the future of progressive politics is way beyond that paradigm. And it's, the fresh faces thing is real. Yeah. Do you think she should run again? Putting you on the spot.
Nina Turner?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know too much about like what other progressive candidates might consider running in that district, so I feel like I would want to know that. But I think she should certainly consider it.
Yeah.
I think she should talk to the grassroots in her district, see like what progressive organizers there want her to do. And I do think it's important in primaries that we really do try to coalesce around one progressive candidate. So yeah, really would depend who else is running. But also, I very much agree with you about that we do need to, move past the 2020 primary. And who else I think would agree is Bernie Sanders.
Mm-hmm.
He's really focused right now on working with Joe Biden to try to push Joe Biden left, but to try to shepherd this very progressive package through Congress. And in his position as the very powerful chair of the Senate Budget Committee. And so Bernie's not focused on rehashing 2020. He's not focused on Twitter fights because Bernie is busy.
And so, yeah. All right, Linda, this is my next question. How do we get everyone else to not focus on Twitter fights and be busy? Do you have insights here? Because you might be about to save America.
Yeah, I don't think we're ever going to get everyone not to focus on Twitter fights because there are just some people, like, their identity is wrapped up in their Twitter fights, and that's always going to be the case. And so I think it's just our job as organizers to have a healthy sense of balance between, social media, the other work that we do day to day, and just not to get too caught up in very online drama all the time. Think to ourselves first, like, what implications does this really have in the real world? Does it matter for the people who are actually going to be impacted by these policies?
Yeah, it's a weird thing that Alex and I end up talking about a lot because it's a very new problem. This is not a problem that existed even really 10 years ago. How old is Twitter? But it's a new dynamic. Even when what was your first social media account?
Oh boy.
I feel like MySpace and Zanga for me.
Yeah, I guess Neopets doesn't count as social media, does it?
I forgot about Neopets.
Like, it kind of was-ish. I don't know. There were forums, all sorts of things. I was on all kinds of forums back in the day before there was social media. Like, political blogs and stuff.
Yeah.
Like, I read Daily Kos and all that as a teenager, but also for, like, all kinds of shows and stuff that I liked. But man, I guess, like, social media, may have been Facebook, because I don't think I ever had a MySpace or a Friendster or any of that.
Oh, I definitely had a MySpace. Top friend drama. Very real. I'm just sorry. This is way off topic. But it isn't off topic because my point is I think even when we had social media, there was a period before this toxic dynamic that we're talking about where like non-productive digital engagement starts to suck up a lot of time and energy of people who maybe otherwise would be more effectively politically involved. And look, you and I both work in the digital space. We're obviously huge fans of using social media to talk about politics and engage people politically, but there is this other thing that happens where it's like you said, it becomes people's identity to get very toxic with each other online. And it's frightening and it's unfortunate because you see it with, you know, I have a friend who always says, if you judge by the internet, then, 40% of America are militant communists, which I would love, by the way. I wish that were the case, but,
Right. The
you
only
know,
problem is the other 60% are Nazis.
well, okay, but exactly. And that's the problem. And it's just, I know I've recommended this book before on here, but I highly recommend everyone read this book, Twitter into Your Gas, and it's all about how social media can help movements until it doesn't, and it gets carried away with itself. I mean, is that something that you think comes to play in races like the one we just saw?
Yeah, I think that it very much does, like both in terms of the way that the race was talked about, like kind of in, Nina Turner's like history as well. And like I don't want to, go overboard criticizing someone who I really do think is an incredible movement leader, someone who's done
Totally.
so much work to build support around the issues, but I do think that social media tends to just incentivize like certain things that are then like not necessarily productive when you want to run for a political office. Right, the kind of things, if someone wants to get followers and wants to get attention for their issues on social media, it really rewards like dunking on people, being just like very aggressive in a way that isn't always productive when you're later trying to win over an electorate. And I think just more broadly, it's really encouraged all of us, whether it's like especially like even different wings of the Democratic Party, different politicians, etc., to really retreat into our corners and take everything very personally. When like sometimes
Mm-hmm.
it's like not actually all that personal. It's not a big deal. And social media really incentivizes seeing everything as a big deal all the time.
Oh my God, that's what it is. Sorry to use the Lord's name in vain, but yes, exactly. It's what it really, you're talking. I'm like, wow, she just nailed it. That's a problem. The things that gain you followers are not the things that make you a good organizer. And that's a very real problem for all of us, including us individually, because it's like, okay, you're going to communicate about this issue. And if you frame things one way, you're going to get a bunch of retweets from people who think like you. And that's the exact way that's probably going to alienate people who maybe could join your coalition. And that's the problem. There's like this whole it's not my job to educate you line of thinking that I find very obnoxious. Yeah, of course, you're not going to win over a reactionary fascist. Agreed. But that's not where most people live. Especially most people who are moderate by default, just because they don't spend tons of time thinking or talking about these issues. And if we are seen as being this group of people, and again, I'm with you. I wasn't trying to criticize Nina as a person, but just we in the Bernie bro camp, I think a lot of the shade is unearned. And they did this study about this, right? Bernie bros are no more aggressive online than anyone else. Did you see this study?
Hadn't seen that one, but certainly, having spent the whole campaign on Twitter seeing what everyone's followers said, it doesn't surprise me at all.
Right. Like I actually love it. It's my favorite it's my favorite study about online behavior. They found Bernie bros are no more aggressive than anyone else. That said, I don't want to act like the aggression that exists in any political camp isn't a problem. Because we're not trying to win over Nazis. We're trying to win over people closest to us. And as we move forward, I really do think that, and this brings us to the Cori Bush week in the life of Cori Bush. I think that's how you do it. Like talk about positive social media, positive demonstrating, positive action. So for those of you who don't know, Cori Bush, a member of Congress from St. Louis, who was formerly unhoused at some point in her life. I think it was in her 20s, right? When she was like a young woman. But to protest the ending of the eviction moratorium for people who don't know, the government put a pause on evictions because spoiler alert, not a great idea to be turning people out of their homes in the middle of a highly contagious pandemic. And it was going to expire the beginning of August, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so we were just talking to Brad before the show. Apparently it's not fully in place, but Biden extended it basically because Congresswoman Cori Bush was sleeping out on the steps of the Capitol and saying, "Hey, as someone who has lived without a home, it's a really dangerous and vulnerable thing in the best of situations. Maybe a time when the Delta variant is surging is not the time to be turning people out of their homes." Go figure. And what she did was brave and charismatic and wonderful and lit up the internet in a way that was engaging and fantastic. There is a way to do this. I mean, I was very inspired by it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I thought it was just one of the most powerful works of organizing that I've ever seen. And I think it's so important that, like, she did have to go offline, and then, as you said, it lit up the internet. But this is, like, not organizing that started online. She used the internet as a tool. She posted, any of my colleagues or people who are in DC who want to join me, I'm going to the steps of the Capitol, and we're not going to move until we've extended this eviction moratorium and stopped people from getting thrown out of their homes. And that just was incredibly powerful. And it shows how you can, like, use online organizing as a tool to power offline organizing and really make change. And the way that she used her personal story and the stories of what's happening to people around the country to make change, I think, like, that's just so powerful. And you can also see just where the progressive movement is relative to the Obama years, that like, there was that leverage, right? Like, Cori Bush spoke, and the rest of the Democratic Party did ultimately listen, and Joe Biden had to listen. And I don't know that it's because Joe Biden is necessarily any more progressive in his heart than Barack Obama is, but it's because our movement has so much more power now. And Cori Bush just really exemplified that this week.
And it's everything we're talking about. I mean, it's why I don't, it's why I don't want us to take our losses too seriously when so much is going well. As you started the show with, we're facing some of the most progressive legislation we've seen in decades, which is very, very exciting. And we have a member of Congress who is not just a progressive, not just somebody who is clearly a lovely moral person, but somebody who just showed in a textbook wonderful way that demonstrating does work. I really get over the cynicism of people like, oh, like these kinds of protests are they're just vanity projects. Quite clearly not. And you know what? If I don't understand that either, right? So what if what if the worst an action does is get attention for something? How is that bad? How is that a waste of time? But yeah, I mean, another book recommendation, Erica Chenoweth's, I forget the name of it. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's like Why Civil Disobedience Works or something. Do you know the book I'm talking about?
Not that one. I knew the other one, Twitter and Tear Gas. That one's on my list because the author is really. I love reading all of her stuff, so I want to get to that one. But
does she have other books you would recommend? Because I've just read that one.
So I think that's her only book, but she really has written a lot about, especially around the pandemic, around sociology, like how people's brains work and how we just function as a society during pandemics, that I think has been really fascinating and brings a lot of unique insight into some of the behaviors that we've seen. So that's a little bit of a tangent, but
no, not a tangent. That's awesome. I didn't know that, but that's very cool. Yeah. All these brilliant women political scientists, I'm telling you, they will change your world. But right. So it's like Why Civil Disobedience Works or something is the title, but Erica Chenoweth, and she writes a lot about how these moments of demonstrating are not just they're not just effective. They're one of the most effective things we can do. And I know it sounds redundant to say that on this show, but in the outside world, I actually face a lot of that cynicism. I mean, do you deal with that too, Linda? Like when you're talking to people that are not in our little Social Security Works family about, does this stuff even matter? Like, why protest?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, cynicism is really, I would say, our number one greatest enemy as organizers, like almost more so than the opposition, because there's like less people who are committed to disagreeing, especially on an issue like Social Security or Medicare for all. And then there are people who are just cynical, who don't think that their voice matters, and it's our job to teach them that their voices do matter. We actually, in pre-pandemic times, like Alex, several others of us go around the country delivering a messaging presentation to groups of seniors on how to talk about Social Security. And we have a whole slide, like, man, I almost wish I could pull up the illustration of it, but that basically just says nihilism, because that's what Social Security's opponents are really trying to foster in the population, to make people think, oh, Social Security is never going to be there for you anyway, and so why fight for it? So that's just one manifestation of the phenomenon, but it's really the Republican Party's number one political tactic too, is break government and then point to the government and say, look, it's broken, it doesn't work for you, everything sucks, don't bother to vote. So yeah, cynicism, it's a big problem. It's what we're fighting against every day.
Yeah, and I mean, I know that we talk about this every show. It's like, why we do this. Because, here's the deal. There's tons of information out there, right? The internet is a wild and wonderful place, and there's a lot of crazy things, but there's a lot of, we can all be as brilliant as we want to be. Wikipedia is a great resource. Like, there's just tons of information. But none of that matters if people fundamentally do not believe things can be different. And it's a very weird time to be alive, because when you think about it, we have more tools at our disposal to create social change than ever. And I guess that's why, bringing this whole thing together, it's why it makes me sad when instead we fall prey to our vulnerability, not just to infighting, but to like a specific type of infighting that is so not productive. The Twitter infighting. Because in-person conflict can sometimes be productive, I mean, right. Are you a high conflict person? I feel like you're not, Linda.
Not usually. It depends on the circumstances, right? But I don't know. I feel like Alex and I are complementary, because it's like he sort of does the conflict, and then, I'll sometimes be the good cop, or Michael. I don't know if Michael's ever been on the show. That would be fun. But
I have said that for a long time. Yes, that is probably true. I would say with some confidence, Alex is a higher conflict person than you. Oh God, Alex. I hope he knows we're gossiping about him. It's funny. I think Alex is a higher conflict person than me, but I'm probably closer to the Alex end of the spectrum. So I'm not anti-fighting or anti-infighting. I just, we're in a very, very strange time. There is no precedent. And I do think it's very important we are gentle with ourselves, because I think before the pandemic, I myself sort of underestimated the impact of the digital space on a lot of these questions. But did you watch The Social Dilemma, that Netflix documentary about how social media is melting our brains?
I did. Yeah, that was interesting. I don't know if you ever watched Mad Men, but I just thought the fact that it was like the actor who played Pete on that show was like, they had him representing the people manipulating the algorithm. And like, he's just like a very slimy character who's always trying like new advertising techniques on the show. So I just thought that was the most perfect casting. It's like, my God, Pete is invading my brain, and that's terrifying.
That is very true. I didn't think about that. That was perfect casting, wasn't it? I love Mad Men. I want to rewatch it. Anyway, yeah, we're in a very, very, very new space for all of this, and I do think we have to be gentle and easy with ourselves, which, oh God, I don't even know what I want to bring up next, but I apologize for keep coming back to social media, but one of the good things it does is, how are you feeling about Andrew Cuomo right now?
Oh God. Oh God. I mean, it's good as in like, it lets us see that there are other people who are sane and not just boomers in our lives who are like, I don't think he did anything wrong. What?
Well, right. And that's what I mean. I mean, I feel like, again, we're talking about positive and negative aspects. Like, I think that it definitely played a role in his fall from grace for sure.
Yeah, no, I think that it definitely did. The fact that like people, right, we saw it with Me Too a few years ago, are really able to see that they're not alone, that there are often other people in the same circumstances, other people who are willing to support them. And so I think like that's social media at its best, when it really does foster solidarity, right? And people talk about cancel culture like, oh, is this like negative thing? And sometimes it is, but there are people out there who need to be canceled, and Andrew Cuomo is right at the top of that list.
Well, because it's not, I think that I don't know if people really understand what actually has happened, because I've seen it reduced a lot to, oh, he was like a little bit more handsy in a hug. That's not, no. He is psychologically intimidating. It sounds like the majority of young women who've worked for him, and ways that are very like, it sounds like so what I've read, it sounds like he hasn't maybe gone at the full Trump extent with the full-fledged like,
Ugh.
but it's kind of worse. It's like he's created this just vibe of sexually unsafe spaces for all the women who work for him, where they're interrogated about their personal lives, asked to share very personal inappropriate details, like grab women in inappropriate places. It's just bad. It's bad. But it's also, like a lot of predators, just a small part of him doing this with his entire career, harassing political opponents, harassing progressive opponents, harassing members of the legislature in ways that far beyond extend like the realm of political appropriateness. This is a person who just narcissistically has relied upon the political privilege he has to behave like a tyrant sexually, but also in other ways as well. And, I think people are kind of catching on finally. Why did it take this long? Do you know?
Well, I think a lot of it is just like what our society's perception has been about what makes a leader, right? Equating bullying with leadership, and how that's gone on for such a long time. So I completely agree with you that the way that he's behaved in the political space, it's not divorced at all from the way that he's been treating women for decades. And I think that we just need to fundamentally reassess what a leader should look like. And that should be someone more like AOC, who's focused on building solidarity, instead of someone like Andrew Cuomo, who's focused on bullying people to get his way. Because it really should be no surprise that people who are willing to behave this way towards, in the political space, right, towards other politicians, like clearly towards people that like should be their colleagues, are also creating this incredibly toxic office environment, and also gaslighting women, right? In some ways, like, is it any better that he wasn't as quite as overt as Trump, given that like what he did do was so horrifying? And it's just that like maybe in some cases he left it like just gray enough to be gaslighting women, making them think like, oh, am I imagining this somehow? Is this just me? Like, what exactly is going on here? And what's going on is that Andrew Cuomo is a terrible human being.
Well, and it's, I'm really excited. Linda, you and I have talked about this personally. Sorry, not trying to bring up personal stuff. But Linda and I are both sisters, not of each other, though that would be awesome, but of younger, we both have younger sisters, and I have so many. And like, it's really weird because, I'm 30, right? In my early 20s, God, I'd have to make an Excel spreadsheet for all the creepy, weird things that happen to me with men in politics. That, as I'm hearing these Cuomo stories, it's very edifying to hear this be called out, because in my early 20s, I'm like, well, like, maybe this is just how it is. Like, I'm laughing. It's not funny, but it is a little bit, because it's like, when you're young, a lot of things are going on. One, patriarchy, big deal. But two, your brain isn't fully developed. So you're kind of like, well, am I making this up? Like, I myself am a young, emotional person. Perhaps I misread into the way he was touching me or the way he was talking to me. And so for me, watching my sisters grow up in a very different attitude is just so wonderful. You know, it's so encouraging. And I really hope it continues to be that way, because it's like the trauma that professional women have to endure to have careers in male dominated spaces. I feel like it doesn't get talked about enough because there are just so many other issues we're dealing with as a society and frankly as women. But it's like, it's a very real vibe of, oh, okay, if I'm going to be in this place where there are powerful men, I guess this is just the cost of admission. You know, I've just got to tolerate this. I mean, did you feel that way when we were little?
Yeah, I do remember feeling that way. And even more so, I have only one younger sister. She's 7 years younger, so in her early 20s now. And I would definitely say if there's anything that's more radicalizing than just existing as a woman in society with everything that we have to deal with, it's having a younger sister, right? And it's like one thing to be treated a certain way yourself, but then like hearing about it happening to people in your family, like that's almost worse. But I do think that it does encourage me that, like, even in the 7 year age gap between us, like a lot has happened in the way that society talks about it. Like the Me Too movement was all in between when I was in her early 20s and now that she is. And so I'm trying to be hopeful that we are seeing some changes. But it's one thing, and it's like, it's funny, I advocate on behalf of seniors. I really think that elders have an important role to play in our movement in so many ways. And I don't want to generalize, but I do wish that some members of the older generation could just, move a little bit faster on this one. And it's been frustrating to see just like how many older folks like are defending folks like Cuomo.
It is frustrating. And I think that, obviously I defer to the sociologists and the psychologists and people who study this scientifically, but my sense is that the big difference is, for our grandparents, a lot of women were in the workforce either because they were quirky feminists that wanted to be there, or because like they were working class women who had no choice, right? But now it doesn't matter whether you're working class, middle class, women work. We have to. We live in a dual income economy, for better or for worse. So it's a very, very different dynamic now where it's like, okay, this pervasive harassment, this pervasive intimidation, this pervasive boys club, it's no longer like this it's a much larger number of women that are dealing with this, is I guess what I'm trying to say. Not trying to minimize the fact that, again, working class women have always worked. But now, in these law offices and political offices and administrations, it's not just men and like the one token woman. It is becoming pretty even. And yet, these patriarchal ways of behaving, I don't want to even say patriarchal because that's too generous. These abusive ways of behaving have persisted. It's bizarre. And it is very exciting to see this sort of change. I mean, if you guys are more interested in what's going on with the governor of New York, the Daily recently, I think a couple days ago, did a very good debrief of what he's being charged with and whether or not he'll resign. But he's refusing. Isn't that crazy? Like, talk about male privilege. Like, he has all these credible accounts of harassment, and people are saying, the president is saying, you need to resign. You need to step aside. And he's refusing. What is that?
Yeah, I think it's just the height of arrogance that's really been drummed into him. I mean, probably since he was a little boy, right? His father was a politician, so he was just a big deal from the time that he was young. And in some ways, it's not so different than Donald Trump, where from the moment that you're a baby, people are like, oh, you're super special and the world revolves around you and everything else has to get out of your way and accommodate you. And I think there's an issue with like little boys being raised like that in general, but especially people from a family like the Cuomos or the Trumps. And so I think that's a big part of it. And then I feel like what you were saying also about a critical mass of women in the workforce and that leading hopefully to less acceptance of this kind of behavior, that's a big part of it. And then I also feel like, the attitude from some, not all of the older generation, it's what we see reflected in so many other issues as well. This question of, are you going to feel like, well, I suffered, and so that means that everyone else should too, right? Treated like fraternity hazing or something? Or are you going to say, I suffered, and that's what makes me want to work as hard as I can to make sure that nobody else ever has to again?
Well, and I mean, right there, this is a topic that I think we discuss a lot. And this is why, unfortunately, not trying to tell people how to lead their lives, but inner work has to be a part of organizing. Because I think there is a Stockholm syndrome that you hear, fortunately, not all, but you do hear from, unfortunately, a lot of even professional women of a certain age. Like, oh, this generation is so sensitive. What we had to deal with, like, ma'am, sir, I don't understand, but I do understand. That's the problem. If you have not processed the stress and or outright trauma that you went through, it is all too easy to normalize that trauma and be like, "Oh, that's just what working as men with men is like. That's just what men are like." That's not what men are like. And I am very excited to be part of a generation where men, we still have rape culture issues, okay, in our millennial cohort, but it is viewed very differently. Your average man does not hear the Andrew Cuomo stuff and go, "Oh yeah, that's great. That's wonderful. We should definitely be doing that." And that's exciting. It's exciting to be a part of a shift in that way. But yeah, the age stuff is very real. Do you think that this is getting a lot of attention in a productive way or an unproductive way?
Well, I think it's just been such a busy news week that it's tough for it to completely break through, but I do feel like my sense is it's getting a fair amount of attention in New York State, which is where that it matters the most, and that there's some momentum now around impeaching him, which I really hope is what happens, because it seems like that's the only way that he's going to be leaving before the next election. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, and then like more broadly, I do think that it is very productive for this to keep be getting attention. Because like since Me Too, there has been like a little bit of a backlash. Maybe things have gotten more quieter on that front, and people need to know that this has not stopped at all and that it remains unacceptable. Like Me Too is not a fad. It's how things are gonna be from now on.
And thank God for that. Honestly, you said, I know we always do this. Linda, do you want to have a 2-hour show next time?
Sounds good.
You said something so true, and I really want to just like reiterate how much I agree with it. You mentioned something about like there is a problem with young boys being raised that way in particular, and I think it's very true with any gender of child. They've all this research is coming out about like the self-esteem thing is maybe not as great as people think, because if you tell a young person that everything they do is good and wonderful, they aren't necessarily going to develop that reflective process of, am I behaving in ways which are befitting a moral person, right? But that's especially a problem when you're dealing with privileged white men. And it's like, I don't like to generalize because I feel like it's become an internet meme that feminists are always mad at white men, but it's a very real problem. If you have this group of people that are raised being told everything they do is good and right, and then they like turn into predators at an alarming rate, we need to stop acting like that's an accident. Nobody of any gender or race or orientation should feel like they can behave in any way they want without censor. Ever. And I don't think that should be a radical thing to say. I hope he steps aside. I don't think he will. I really don't.
Yeah, I don't either.
But okay, so we have 10 minutes. 10 minutes to deal with the most important part of all of this. So, lots of things going on. what should people be doing? Who should they be calling, writing, emailing, tweeting?
Yeah, so right now, the most important people to be getting in touch with is senators, and I would say especially senators who are on the finance committee. They're working right now on finalizing things for the reconciliation, the giant package that I want to reiterate from the beginning of the show really has the potential to be the most progressive piece of legislation since the New Deal if we fight for it. So it's really just huge. And so we're encouraging everyone who has a Democratic or independent senator to call their senators. And then if you're unfortunate enough to be represented by 2 Republicans, to actually call Chuck Schumer, tell him that we want a big, bold reconciliation package that includes Medicare expansions, lowering the Medicare eligibility age, vision, hearing, dental, cap on out-of-pocket cost, that invests in long-term care in the home and community, that creates a program of paid family and medical leave. Like, we actually have the chance right now to finally, at long last, create national paid family and medical leave and catch up with the rest of the world. We're the only industrialized country that doesn't have one. To reform supplemental security income, which is a program. It's not technically part of Social Security, but it's run by the Social Security Administration. It was intended to help the poorest people in America, people with disabilities, but it hasn't been updated since the 1970s. And there's a huge amount of momentum now behind updating it. And so that's something that we're trying to get into the reconciliation package as well. And I know that I'm kind of throwing a lot right now at the viewers, so I would also encourage folks to go to socialsecurityworks.org for updates. We talk a lot about all of this on our email list, on our social media feeds, Facebook, Twitter. And then also, just even though it's August, I would definitely say keep watching the news. Follow people on Twitter and Facebook who are talking about policies, who aren't just focused on fights. And things are changing really quickly. And so I just really encourage folks to stay tuned in. And this is absolutely not the time to give in to any sort of cynicism or apathy, because we have so many opportunities.
Yeah, a lot. It's very exciting. So do you have a sense, and I know, like you said, it changes every day, of when things are going to be getting voted on? What are people, when is this homework due?
So it's funny. Like, usually I rely on our ledge director. I'm just G-chatting her all day long. Like, hey, Jasmine, what's the latest timeline? Because it is constantly changing. And Congress is very, very good at saying, oh, my dog ate my homework, but don't worry, I'll get you a new one tomorrow. Like, things are getting delayed all the time. But it seems like this bipartisan infrastructure package, they're going to be voting on that very soon. Then they're going to go home for recess for a good chunk of August, probably, which is its own thing. Like, I kind of think that usually people are a little bit too critical of district work periods, that, like, it makes sense for members of Congress to take some time, go home, meet with their constituents. But at this point, like, we're still in a pandemic. So much of that stuff is virtual anyway. And there's so much that they really need to get done that I am kind of on the side of, you know what, maybe Congress should not be taking a recess this year, or at least make it a much shorter one. But be that as it may, it does look like they're going to be recessing for part of August, and then they're going to come back in September, and we're going to start really seeing things move in September, possibly in October, on this big package. So I really would encourage folks to stay tuned in.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. I love that you bring that up, because I feel that way too, right? Most members go home to their districts, they're working, they're speaking with constituents, which they absolutely should be doing. However, we live in strange and exciting times. So, yeah, the August recess is a big deal. And I know I feel like a broken record, but unfortunately, I think sometimes you have to say important things a lot. We have this unique opportunity for tremendous, incredible, wonderful, big action. We have all of the power levers, and we cannot, now is not the time to be, a little bit, I don't want to say lazy, just maybe tuned out. I get it. We're all in information overwhelm, but we should be excited. We should be happy. We should be happy warriors because, I think this thing happened, and I'm sure, Linda, that you have a lot of thoughts on this with the Trump era, where there was this spike in galvanized big energy. And I actually don't agree that people have tuned out. I think the awesome thing about maybe the one awesome thing about all of that is that a lot of people are still engaged. However, I think there's this fallacy to get most active when there's actually kind of the least opportunity to actually do things, where it's like, oh, like we've got some Democrats in all of these places, we're gonna be great. Like, no, now is the time for that energy. I mean, do you feel that way too?
Yeah, I agree with you that I'm actually really heartened by how many people haven't tuned out and are still organizing. And I think the most important thing is just to keep up that momentum.
Yeah.
Because that is true. Now is the time that we really can achieve things. We have Democrats in the White House and in Congress, and we need to demand that they take that power, this huge historic opportunity, and they do as much as they can with it, because that's what they owe to us, to the voters, to the organizers, to the American people.
Yeah. Well, we are at time. Linda, do you have any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I think I would really just close on what I want people to take from this week is hope. That image of Cori Bush surrounded by other members of Congress, people from the community who turned out on the Capitol steps, and that's the vision that we should have on our heads going forward into the coming months, into this fight.
Yeah, it was just beautiful. It was beautiful. And I don't know what the people watching, like, I don't know what your Cori Bush moment is, but we all have ways that, like, in ideas, like she, her history as an unhoused person led to that vision, and just beautifully simultaneously, like, strong and very personal way of demonstrating. And there's always this, like, talk about, let's not lionize trauma. It's not a good thing that people have had to go through things. That's true, 100%. But we all have things in our lives which make us uniquely qualified to organize around specific issues. And yeah, that, among other reasons, is why I found that so inspiring. So thank you, everybody, for being with us. And I am very excited to continue accomplishing wonderful, amazing things with all of you, especially because it's going to be a very eventful month. Harass your members of Congress. We will talk to you soon. Goodbye.